After a business trip, I decided to drive home earlier than planned, without telling my husband, so I could cook a dinner to celebrate our fifth wedding anniversary. I parked quietly, stepped softly toward the living room window, and there, through the curtain, I saw him, my husband, on his knees, kissing the 6-month pregnant belly of his close female friend. Around them, their friends cheered, "Tristan, you're going to be such a great dad!" The sight froze me in place. They were celebrating a child that had nothing to do with me, inside the very house I paid for. I walked away in silence and made a single phone call. The next morning, my husband trembled, because he had just learned who the baby's real father was. That day, I, Kimberly Martinez, CEO and founder of Summit Edge Gear, had just finished my speech at the National Mountaineering Conference in Denver. The entire auditorium stood up and applauded as I delivered my final line. I climbed not to escape weakness, but to prove my strength. I smiled softly, bowed to the audience, a wave of fulfillment swelling inside me. 10 years ago, I was just a young woman with a backpack, selling handmade climbing ropes online. Now I was running a company headquartered in Boulder, supplying climbing gear to thousands of customers across the U.S. After the ceremony, I planned to stay 3 more days to meet with partners and distributors, a part of my brand expansion strategy. But as I stepped out of the convention center, a cold wind brushed past, and a strange feeling stirred, like something was urging me to go home early. My phone rang. Sophie Grant, my close friend and climbing teammate, was calling. She laughed through the line. "You've become an icon for women conquering summits now, Kimberly. When are you coming back? I was planning to help you prep for the 5-year anniversary party." I glanced at the organizer's itinerary email. The shuttle returning to Colorado Springs was scheduled for Monday morning. I smiled and replied, "I'm coming back earlier than planned. Tonight. I want to cook dinner for Tristan myself, instead of sending him a goodnight text." Sophie laughed. "Romantic much. Let's hope this time he's ready to do the dishes." I laughed too, but deep down, there was a strange unease. Maybe it was just fatigue. Or intuition. On the drive out of Denver, my white Land Rover cut through the Rockies, late afternoon light stretching across the snow. I thought of Tristan Blake, my husband, the man who once helped me design the first logo for Summit Edge, back when he was still an accountant. He always said, "You're the climber, I'm the ground that keeps you steady." But now, that ground was fracturing. 6 months ago, Tristan lost his job. He claimed AI had replaced accountants, but I knew he'd been fired after repeatedly submitting incorrect reports, costing the firm a contract. I had still been giving him $800 a week to focus on job hunting. I kept believing that with patience, he'd find his way back to himself. The car turned into Broadmoor Bluffs, where our 2-story home stood quiet among snow-covered pines facing Pikes Peak. Just as I killed the engine and reached for the garage opener, I froze. The driveway was full of unfamiliar cars. Yellow balloons hung along the fence, along with a white painted sign, "Welcome, baby!" I squinted, wondering, who was throwing a party here? Tristan had never mentioned any friend with a newborn. I walked slowly toward the living room window. Music, laughter, and lights poured out, making my chest tighten. Through the sheer curtain, I saw Tristan, my husband, kneeling, kissing the belly of a blonde woman, Michaela Hale, his close friend who had once helped him look for work at Oakfield Realty. Her belly was visibly large, at least 6 months. Tristan beamed, feeding her a slice of cake, as friends around them cheered. "Tristan, you're going to be such a great dad." That scene froze me where I stood. In the very house I paid for, they were celebrating a child that had nothing to do with me. I felt like the ground beneath my feet was collapsing. But instead of storming in, I quietly took out my phone and filmed the entire scene. When I stopped recording, I slipped the phone back into my coat, took a deep breath, and stepped off the porch. No tears, no rage, just a freezing silence. I opened a long-distance ride app back to Denver and waited on a stone bench by the gate for 10 minutes, wordless. When the car pulled up, I said to the driver, "Hyatt Regency downtown, Denver." I arrived at the hotel around 9 p.m. In the dimly lit room, I sat on the floor, watching the city lights reflect through the snow on the windowpane. You think you've won, Tristan? You just triggered the final climb of your life. I opened my laptop, logged into the bank account, and transferred over $400,000 from our joint account into my personal one. Then I emailed my accountant. Freeze all of Tristan's supplementary cards. Effective immediately, after that, I called Jill Conway, an old friend from Stanford, who's now a lawyer in Boulder. I want to file for divorce, discreet but fast. Jill replied, I need proof and financial documents. Meet me in the morning, I answered. You'll have everything. Outside the window, the snow was falling heavier. In Colorado Springs, Tristan was probably fumbling with his declined card while Michaela gave a fake little laugh. Probably a bank glitch. I let out a faint smile, not from joy, but because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I looked out the window, the snow blanketing the night sky, and whispered, "This time, I won't cry." The next morning, I awoke to the first sunlight filtering through the hotel window. Last night, I had managed only a little over an hour of sleep, yet my mind was unusually clear, like when I stand before a treacherous cliff, knowing there is exactly one path: climb or fall. I made a cup of black coffee, opened my laptop, and double-checked every bank transaction. The money had been safely transferred to my private account, and all of Tristan's supplementary cards read "suspended." A cold, controlled sense of command spread through me, the same sensation I had when steering the company through its earliest crises. I drove to Boulder, the location of Conway and Rhodes LLP, Jill Conway's law firm, my old friend from Stanford. Jill had always been forthright to the point of ruthless in debate, and that was exactly why I trusted her. Her office was on the 13th floor of a modern glass tower, overlooking the snow-glittering Flatirons. As I entered, Jill was waiting, her hair tied high, holding a thick stack of files. She looked me over from head to toe, her eyes half probing, half compassionate. "I read about the conference yesterday," she said, "and then got your call in the night." "I'm guessing it's bigger than what I first thought," I nodded faintly. "Bigger than any frozen cliff I've ever climbed." We sat down. Jill opened her laptop, jotting quick notes, her voice calm but decisive. "Kimberly, the first task is to let them impale themselves. You need not attack, just erect the right barriers. I'll build an ironclad asset dossier. When it all collapses, you'll be the only one left standing." I inhaled deeply, withdrew from my bag a file I'd prepared overnight. Copies of the deed to Broadmoor Bluffs, solely in my name, no joint ownership. Payroll and stock statements for Summit Edge Gear, and my personal securities portfolio. Each document was neatly ordered, clipped by a small silver carabiner. My father's gift. The man who once told me, "If a rope isn't secure, never cling to it." Jill flipped through page after page, her eyes lighting upon the notary seal on the house title. "Good," she said. "This property is entirely your separate asset." He has no claim. In fact, if Tristan files for division, I can countersue him. I remained silent a moment, then spoke slowly. "I don't want him jailed. I just want it over. Yet they must pay the price in their own reputations." Jill closed her laptop, leaned back, her gaze angled toward the window where snow drifted gently. "Kimberly, do you know what I most admire about you? You've never wielded a knife. You wage strategy. Don't let them see you retaliating. Let them self-implode in plain daylight." I looked out at the distant peaks, my heart suddenly still. I thought of Tristan, the man who once held my hand atop Pike's Peak, calling me his entire world. Now that world had crumbled, but instead of dragging me down, it had opened a new path. Jill asked, "What would you like me to start with?" I replied firmly, "I want to file for divorce this week, and I want you to check whether he has debts in my name. I won't let anyone use me as a shield for their failures. Jill nodded, typing a few lines. I'll need your bank statements from the past 6 months, insurance paperwork, and Tristan's old employment contracts. If he ever misrepresented himself, I can prove his job loss was his fault, not I. I. I left Jill's office around noon. The snow had stopped. The sky was clear, sunlight bouncing off cliffs like glass. I stood at the curb, feeling cold seeping through my coat, yet inside I burned with warmth. I knew I was in the early stage of a new journey, not a climb up stone, but up layers of deceit. And this time, I didn't need anyone to belay me. I departed Jill's building with all my steps planned. Driving through downtown Boulder, my phone rang. It was Gavin Brooks, a name Jill had just mentioned, a private investigator who'd served nearly a decade as a Denver police officer before founding his own firm specializing in fraud and infidelity investigations. Jill had said, he's trustworthy, not cheap, but discreet and well-connected in the legal world. I picked up. His deep, clipped voice rang. Ms. Conway said you need someone discreet. I won't ask why, just your target. I answered, Michaela Hale. She's pregnant, and I want everything there is to know about her, including what she tries to hide. 3 days later, we met at a small cafe in Denver's Lodo district. Gavin was a man in his mid-40s, solidly built, salt and pepper hair, eyes seasoned. He placed a folder before me and whispered, You need not explain more. I reviewed Michaela Hale's public record. She was once internally reprimanded at Oakfield Realty for unprofessional conduct with a male client, though never enough for termination. I raised an eyebrow. And you suspect more? Gavin nodded, drawing some nighttime photographs where a pregnant woman walked with a middle-aged man under dim streetlights. He said, That's her. The man is Charles Hale, her stepfather. They often met at a bar in Aurora, just 3 miles from her home, later moving to a small nearby motel. He was once investigated for sexual assault of a minor a decade ago, but never prosecuted. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Stepfather? I echoed, as though disbelief might restore reality. Gavin nodded, voice steady. Yes. And I have reason to believe the baby is not your husband's. I fell silent. Afternoon light filtered through the window, darkening the coffee in my cup. In my mind, replayed Tristan kneeling over Michaela's belly, the laughter, the cheers. All of it suddenly felt ludicrous. He had been deceived, and maybe nurturing the dream of fathering a child that wasn't his. I looked up, my tone unnervingly calm. Can you confirm that? Gavin replied. With Michaela's DNA sample and the hair sample from Tristan you sent, I'll handle the rest. I immediately knew who could help, Sophie Grant. She was not only my dearest friend, but someone I trusted in every climb, someone who could observe and act without leaving a trace. I called her, my voice composed. Sophie, I need your help with this. Not climbing, just precision, like anchoring on a cliff face. She answered at once. Tell me. I briefly outlined the situation, instructing. Tonight, Oakfield Realty is hosting an internal party at the Lantern. Michaela will definitely attend. I need a drink or a straw, she used. That's it, Sophie asked no further. She was once our team's best climber, and as always, she understood that when I command, there is no room for sentiment. That evening, I stayed in the hotel, replaying yesterday's video segments. The scene of Tristan kneeling and kissing Michaela's belly looped until I had to shut it off. At that moment, my phone buzzed. Sophie's message. Got it! I'll hand it to Gavin tomorrow morning. Are you sure you want the truth? My fingers trembled lightly, but I typed, I want it. Even if it hurts. The next morning, I received Gavin's call as I parked by City Park. His voice deepened. Preliminary results are in. The DNA from Michaela's cup and Tristan's hair sample do not match. I'll produce formal certified forensic results, but perhaps you should sit down when you review them. I held still, knuckles tight around the wheel. I asked softly, Are you sure? Gavin answered. Yes. The baby is not your husband's. I turned off the engine, staring out at the thinly frozen lake before me. Instead of braking, I felt an uncanny calm. In my mind, there was only one thought. If they chose lies, then I would choose truth and turn it into justice. I left the park, phone clenched. Gavin's final text cut through me like a cold blade. The baby is not your husband's. I did not cry. I did not feel the hurt I had anticipated. Instead, a clarity emerged, as if all the puzzle pieces of this game had finally snapped into place. If Tristan could deceive me, then I would make him understand what losing everything feels like. That afternoon, I arranged to meet Mason Torres, a college friend, now a senior manager at Denver Federal Bank, the bank where Tristan and I had jointly held our account for many years. We sat in a private lounge, the glass wall behind revealing bustling downtown Denver. Mason poured me a coffee, his eyes curious yet cautious. Kimberly, he murmured, I suspected this is serious. Jill called me earlier this morning. I nodded, sliding a packet of documents toward him. Account statements, property deed, Summit Edge stock holdings. Mason flicked through the pages, then turned his computer display toward me. You should know, at 9:12 this morning, there was a login attempt on your joint account from an IP in Colorado Springs. The system blocked access automatically after 3 incorrect PIN entries. Do you want me to file a security report? I smirked. No need. I know who it is. He's trying to access money he doesn't know I already moved out last night. Mason sighed, his tone full of regret. I remember Tristan. He was once passionate. What happened between you two? I looked outside. Snow still fell softly. What happened? He lost his principles. And I asked Mason to permanently revoke all supplementary cards, disable Tristan's online access, and block any automatic transactions under his name. Mason typed a few commands, then turned the screen for me to sign confirmation. I signed without hesitation, my hand steady. One more thing, I said. I want to change the beneficiary on my life insurance contract. It's now Tristan Blake. Replace it with Margaret Florce, senior advisor of the charity I'm establishing. Mason nodded, noting it down. This can be processed today. Leaving the bank, I paused in the grand lobby, watching the flow of people under the pale white lights. It felt like the aftermath of a snowstorm, silent, bitter, yet order gradually restoring. My phone rang. Jill. I stepped outside, pressing it to my ear. Her voice came sharp, unflinching. Kimberly, I've just filed the petition with the court. I included all financial evidence showing Tristan has depended on your income for the past 2 years. Moreover, he misreported his earnings to tax authorities to maintain his credit cards. I halted mid-stride, absorbing each word like a hammer blow. Jill continued. If he proceeds to demand asset division, I will use this dossier to countersue marital financial fraud, misuse of joint accounts. He will not only lose property claims, but also his reputation if this goes public. I let a faint smile flicker. For the first time in days, my breath came deep and steady. Do it, I said, quickly and decisively. I want him to realize what's happening only when it's too late. Jill's tone deepened. I understand. But Kimberly, you must steel yourself. When a weak man is cornered, he may do foolish things, I whispered. I know. I hung up, stepped onto the snow-dusty parking lot, tilting my face toward the skyscrapers against the sunset. Everything was beginning to move like a climbing expedition. Each step, each rope, each anchor. I had tied my own safety line, and this time, I would lead the climb. 2 days after securing the accounts and revising all beneficiary designations, I decided it was time to look the woman in the eye. I wanted to meet Michaela Hale, not to argue, but to see what remained when every mask was stripped away. That morning, I stood before the mirror wearing a pale beige suit, my hair tied in a low bun, thin black-rimmed glasses resting on my nose. I chose a simple, professional look, the kind a middle-income homebuyer might wear, not a CEO weathering betrayal. In my bag was a white envelope containing the signed divorce petition and a few photos Gavin had taken, Michaela and her stepfather, Charles Hale, during one shadowy evening in Aurora. I drove to the Oakfield Realty headquarters in South Denver, a sleek glass building with indoor plants and model homes in the lobby. As I stepped in, the digital chime rang and a young receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Hello, what kind of property are you looking for today?" I replied evenly, "Suburban. I have an appointment with Michaela Hale." She said 10 o'clock. She checked the system and nodded. "Yes, Miss Michaela is available. Please proceed to consultation room 3. I walked down the hallway to the last room. The door was slightly ajar, and I saw Michaela arranging some files. As she looked up, our eyes met for a fleeting second, and her entire body seemed to lock. Color drained from her face. "Kimberly," she whispered, her voice shaking as she forced a brittle smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." I closed the door quietly and sat across from her, eyes fixed. "I've heard you're very skilled at taking what doesn't belong to you," I said, my voice low but steady. Michaela offered a nervous laugh, her fingers tightening around a stack of papers. "I'm not sure what you're implying." I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and placed it gently on the table between us. "This is the divorce petition between me and Tristan. He'll receive the official copy in a few days. But I wanted you to be the first to know. Consider it a token of gratitude for showing me the truth sooner than I expected." Her eyes darted to the envelope, flickering between fear and indignation. "What are you doing, Kimberly? Are you trying to threaten me?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "No, I'm just delivering news. The child you're using to deceive others. It's about to be exposed. I have the DNA results, and I know who the real father is." The air grew dense. Michaela turned pale, her grip loosened, and the documents scattered across the floor. You're lying," she stammered. "Tristan is the father." I stood, light from the window, casting a blade of brightness across my face. "If you believe that, get another test. I've already given everything to the attorney. You should start worrying about your future, and your child's, before the police start asking about Charles Hale." She stood frozen, lips tightly pressed, unable to reply. I picked up the envelope and pushed it back toward her. "I'm not here to compete. I'm here to end things. Between us, there's nothing left to say." I turned and walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of peppermint oil and a room thick with fear. As I opened the door into the hallway, I heard the sound of Michaela collapsing into her chair, softly sobbing. I didn't stop. Outside, I tugged my coat straight, letting the early winter chill fill my lungs. It made me feel alive. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to break anything. I just needed the truth. And I knew it had just begun. 3 days after the confrontation with Michaela at Oakfield Realty, I received a text from Gavin early in the morning while sitting in a cafe near Summit Edge Gear's headquarters in Boulder. It read only 3 words. "Results are in." I stared at the screen, my hand still wrapped around my coffee, the warmth soaking into my palm while my chest filled with cold dread. I opened the attached file, a scanned image of the DNA test result, its conclusion printed in bold capital letters. No biological relationship exists between Sample A, Tristan Blake, and Sample B, the fetus of Michaela Hale. I sat still for a long second, staring until the words began to blur. Not from shock, but because the last burden of a long delusional journey had finally lifted off my shoulders. I inhaled deeply and smiled, not bitterly, but with an oddly peaceful release. I replied to Gavin, "Thank you. This is the final safety rope I needed before I cut free." He replied only with a single emoji. "A carabiner." I stared at it and let out a soft chuckle. The metaphor was perfect. I had climbed through the most dangerous stretch, and now I only needed to unclip and step onto solid ground. That afternoon, I went to Jill Conway's office. She was already waiting with a thick file on the table. "We have everything," she said, her voice steady but eyes gleaming like someone watching a perfect chess move unfold. "I've backed up all the videos, photos, and DNA evidence. If Tristan tries to claim any assets, we strike back with this." I sat across from her, my eyes on the leather-bound folder. Jill flipped through it. Expense reports showing Tristan's complete financial dependence on me for 2 years, bank records detailing personal withdrawals, and photos of him and Michaela celebrating a baby shower at my home. I said slowly, "I don't want to ruin him. I just want justice. But if he comes at me, I'll make sure he can't hit anyone else again." Jill looked up, eyes sharp. "Understood. I've prepared the counterclaim: marital financial fraud and misuse of joint funds. What we have is enough to trigger a civil investigation." I leaned back in the chair, gazing out the window where snow was falling softly. That calm strength returned, the kind I used to feel standing at a summit, body sore, heart beating strong. Jill closed the folder and slid it toward me. "Do you want me to send the formal notice now?" I shook my head gently but firmly. "Not yet. I want him to think he still has a chance, so when the truth hits, it hurts more." Jill smirked faintly. "Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive right on time." I nodded. In my heart, the final rope had been cut, and for the first time in years, I felt free. A week after Jill finalized our counterclaim file, she called me just before noon. Her voice was low, tinged with irony. "Kimberly, he just filed for asset division." The reason? Neglect by spouse, prioritization of career, breakdown of marriage. I let out a quiet laugh, not surprised in the least. "Seriously?" I asked, sipping my coffee. Jill continued, "He's also requested the court freeze your assets, including your Summit Edge shares. They think you'll panic about your reputation and settle." I set my cup down, eyes on the snowy peaks in the distance. Good. It's time they realized I'm not the kind of woman who survives on pity. 2 weeks later, we stood in Denver District Court for a preliminary hearing. I entered in a sleek black suit, hair tied high, my gaze unwavering. Across the room, Tristan Blake sat stiffly, trying to appear calm, but I saw the veins pulsing in his neck. Beside him, Michaela avoided my eyes, wearing a pale maternity dress. When the judge asked, "What does the plaintiff request?" Tristan's lawyer stood, voice overly firm. "Your Honor, Mr. Blake suffered emotional harm due to abandonment. Ms. Martinez focused entirely on her career, neglected her husband, and may have concealed assets to avoid fair division." Jill stood, opening her leather portfolio, voice so sharp the room fell silent. "Your Honor, if the plaintiff wants fairness, we offer truth." She placed file after file on the table, speaking steadily. "Here are bank records showing Mr. Blake had no steady income for 2 years, living entirely off my client. Here are receipts for over $32,000 in personal purchases using Ms. Martinez's supplemental cards. And here's video evidence recorded inside Ms. Martinez's home, the house titled solely in her name, showing Mr. Blake and Ms. Hale hosting a baby shower without the owner's consent." I remained seated as the screen lit up, showing Tristan kneeling and kissing Michaela's stomach. A few gasps murmured through the room. The judge tapped his gavel. "Order!" Jill continued without pause. "This is not abandonment. This is betrayal, and worse, unauthorized use of private property to facilitate an affair. All documents confirm the home, the company, and all investments are Ms. Martinez's premarital assets. She owes him nothing, except the silence she has now chosen to break." The judge looked across both tables. "Does the plaintiff respond?" Tristan's lawyer turned to him, but Tristan only bowed his head, lips sealed, his face pale. I saw his hand tremble as Michaela reached for it. The judge ruled, voice firm. "All property, including residence, company shares, and investments, are lawfully the sole property of Ms. Kimberly Martinez. The petition for asset division is dismissed. Court is adjourned. I stood, calmly gathering my documents. Tristan looked at me, his eyes full of confusion and rage, but said nothing. Michaela cried, her makeup smeared. I said nothing. Jill touched my shoulder gently. It's over. He has no way back. As we stepped outside, the Denver wind was cold, but strangely gentle. I looked up at the pale sky, feeling like I had climbed a sheer cliff with no belayer. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not because I had won, but because justice had chosen my side, quiet and steady. 3 days later, Denver's media exploded with the story. The unemployed husband, the revealed affair, and the silent CEO who never played victim. That morning, walking into Summit Edgegear's office, my assistant placed a fresh Denver Tribune on my desk. The headline read, CEO, Kimberly Martinez, the woman who chose silence in the storm. Beneath it was a photo of me leaving the courthouse. Hair up, eyes calm, reporters flanking me. The journalist, Catherine Boyd, wrote, instead of reacting in anger, Martinez used silence as a statement. While many women are broken by betrayal, she rose, calm and undeterred. I read it all, sipping my coffee, not smiling, not fuming. I knew how the press worked. They didn't care about truth. They just wanted a story that sold. But this time, something felt different. The public wasn't mocking me. They supported me. In the comments, hundreds of women shared their stories, saying my calm had given them hope. One wrote, she didn't just win in court, she won in how she responded. My phone rang nonstop that day. Talk shows, business magazines, even a late-night host asking for an interview about surviving modern betrayal. I declined them all. I didn't need to explain my story. I was already writing it a different way. That afternoon, I met Sophie at our usual cafe. She looked at me with pride and concern. You going to speak out? They're talking nonstop online. I shook my head. I don't need to speak. Silence is the strongest response. But I'm thinking of something else. I pulled out a folded page from my coat, a draft I'd written the night before. At the top, Rise Beyond Foundation. I slid it to Sophie. I want to start a foundation for divorced women. Not just financial help, but job training, emotional rebuilding, and most of all, helping them reclaim their dignity. She read it, her eyes lighting up. I'm in. And I know others who will be too. Back at the office, Jill called. Kimberly, every major outlet's siding with you. Tristan lost his job. His reputation's gone. I paused, then said, I'm not happy. Just relieved, Jill chuckled. You've turned pain into purpose, Kimberly. That night, I sat alone in my Denver apartment, laptop open to the logo design for Rise Beyond. I chose a mountain peak, with a severed rope trailing from the cliff, a symbol of freedom after cutting loose. City lights shimmered in the glass, and I realized the world may label me however it wants. Cold, betrayed, resilient. But I know exactly who I am. I don't need revenge. I'm building something bigger. Outside, winter winds sliced between towers, but inside me, a small fire had been lit. Not of rage, but of faith that beyond every storm, there is always light. The news of the trial and the articles spread faster than I expected. 3 days later, Jill's phone buzzed nonstop all morning as various newspapers sought to verify the authenticity of the DNA results. While people in her office murmured about my clean but razor-sharp divorce, a midday bulletin broke. Charles Hale, Aurora real estate developer, is officially under investigation for alleged sexual abuse of a minor and fathering a child with his wife's daughter. I froze, staring at the TV screen in the cafe where I sat. His face appeared on the news, eyes wild and exhausted as police escorted him into a vehicle, the caption scrolling. Insiders say the case was reopened after DNA evidence matched Michaela Hale's fetus. I didn't know who tipped off the police, It might have been Gavin Brooks, or perhaps Michaela in panic confessed something. But one thing I knew for sure: truth, once released, finds its own path. Later that same day, Michaela's biological mother, Evelyn Hale, issued a short public statement to the local press. "I am deeply hurt by my husband's acts and my daughter's actions. I sever all ties with both of them." The words were cold and harsh, but I knew it was something Michaela had never anticipated: being abandoned by the world she'd hidden behind. That evening, just as I returned to my Denver apartment, my phone rang. A familiar number. Tristan. I stared at the screen a moment, then answered. On the other end came heavy breathing and a hoarse voice. "Kimberly, I know you don't want to hear me, but please, don't stay silent. I have nothing left. The company fired me this morning. Friends avoid me. Michaela, she's disappeared. I can't reach her. I don't know what to do anymore." I leaned back against the doorframe, the hallway light casting a pale yellow strip on the wall. I didn't answer immediately. I simply listened to his ragged breaths, his choking sorrow. Then Tristan continued. "I know I was wrong. I was foolish. But I swear I never meant to hurt you. I just felt worthless. You are too strong, and I am nothing." I closed my eyes, hearing every word. For a fleeting moment, I recalled the man who once held my hand atop Pike's Peak, wind whipping our faces, telling me I was the best thing in his life. But that memory receded like morning mist. I said softly, voice steady but not cold, "Tristan, I don't hate you, but I don't love you anymore." Silence fell on the line. Then a single stifled sob echoed before dissolving into nothing. I hung up, placed the phone on the table, and walked out to the balcony. Denver's night sky stretched before me, city lights shimmering like artificial stars. I drew a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I did not feel triumphant, nor vengeful, only a profound stillness, a peace I had lost so long ago but finally found. Below me, the city roared on. Here I stood, hand on the railing, listening to wind thread through my hair, and accepted that one old chapter had closed for good. A month after things quieted, I decided it was time to leave Colorado Springs, the place that once held our home, now only heavy with memory. The house at Broadmoor Bluffs, where I first drafted designs for Summit Edge gear, carried too many echoes of past arguments, broken promises, and that betrayal party in the living room. I listed it for sale via an independent Denver realtor. Within 2 weeks, it sold to a young couple passionate about climbing. When they asked why I was selling, I simply said, "Sometimes to climb higher, you must cut the rope that tied you down." On closing day, I stood in the empty living room, late afternoon light streaming through blinds onto the wall where our wedding photo once hung. I stared at the house one final time and placed the keyring on the kitchen counter, the same counter where a year ago I'd cooked a celebration dinner for a husband no longer deserving. I left without looking back. My flight to Seattle departed the next morning, and I knew this would be the newest climb of my life. Not on rock faces, but through the terrain of my soul. Seattle greeted me with light rain and the salty tang of ocean air. Sophie had arrived a day ahead to help me settle. She took me to view a small apartment by Lake Union, its glass walls stretching toward water shimmering in dusk. "Just enough for one person and a new dream," Sophie said, opening a window to let cold air in. I smiled, watching white sailboats off in the distance, and answered, "Perfect. It makes me feel like I can look straight up at the sky, unhindered by the past." In my early days in Seattle, I spent most time at the Cascade Climbing Center, an indoor climbing gym Summit Edge once sponsored. The old manager, Harold, recognized me when I walked in. "Ms. Martinez, I've heard about your story. I just want to say we're still proud to carry the Summit Edge name here." I nodded and smiled gratefully. In that moment, I realized that my company, my career, and my life were not defined by a marriage lost. They live through the people who still climb, who still believe. That evening, I sat by the window of the apartment, laptop open beside a cup of hot tea. The first heading on the blank page read, Summit within, the mountain inside. I typed slowly. There are cliffs not out there, but inside each of us. And when we climb them, we don't need ropes. We only need courage. Word by word, I rewrote my journey. Not to indict anyone, but to remind myself that betrayal cannot destroy someone who knows how to rise. Seattle's night was quiet, rain tapping on the glass roof, lights reflecting off the lake onto my ceiling. I paused, read that first paragraph, then saved the document. For the first time in a long while, I felt a calm in my heart. I was no longer someone left behind in the storm. I was the one who had climbed beyond it. And I stood at the summit, alone, but not lonely. One foggy June morning in Seattle, rain hung in thick veils. I woke at 3 a.m., donned my old climbing gear, the same outfit I wore when scaling the Rockies years ago. Today, I wouldn't compete or shoot a brand video. I simply wanted to climb. This time, Mount Rainier awaited me, the towering mountain south of the city, its snowy summit wreathed in clouds like the halo of someone who has fallen, then risen. When the shuttle dropped me off at the trailhead, rain pelted the terrain. The cold bit into my skin, but I felt the heat rising in my blood. Each footstep crunched on soft snow. Each breath I drew tasted of sea wind mingled with mountain mist. I climbed alone, the harness cinched tight, hands gripping the ice axe I'd carried for years. Ahead, Rainier's Peak hid behind swirling clouds, a silent challenge. Climbing always teaches you limits, of the body, of patience, of fear. But today, there was no one below to catch me if I slipped, no one alongside to share the burden. Just wind roaring through crevices and the steady beat of my own heart. Midway up, snow thickened so much each step felt swallowed by the frozen blanket. I panted, cold sweat mingling with rain on my face, but in my eyes shone something unfamiliar. Not triumph, but liberation. When I reached the summit, skies were still gray, winds vicious enough to force me crouch. I knelt, pulled from my pack a small white flag embroidered by hand with Rise Beyond. My hands trembled from cold, but my spirit flamed. I planted the flag into the wet snow and stood amid wind and cloud, watching it flutter. Between falling snow and muted light, that flag bore the weight of my journey, from betrayal's abyss to freedom's peak. I whispered into the wind. Freedom doesn't come through vengeance. It arrives when we no longer need revenge. My words vanished into the mist, like the last breath of an old pain. I looked skyward and smiled softly. No one was there to witness, but I knew. I had returned to myself. As I descended, rain still fell, blurring the footprints I left behind. And I understood. That was the most beautiful part of freedom. No one needed to remember. I alone needed to know I had walked beyond it. A few weeks after summiting Rainier, when I returned to Seattle, my email inbox was flooded with legal notices from Jill Conway. She wrote briefly, Tristan's credit case is officially filed. He cannot repay debts because of fraudulent financial disclosures. Court has ordered an expanded investigation. I sat silent, staring at the screen, recalling Jill's words. When they dig their own hole, you just stand still and let them fall. And now that was happening. Piece by piece, the consequences sliding down the very slope Tristan had carved. According to banking records, Tristan Blake had opened 2 new credit cards during our separation, misrepresented income, and attempted to use Summit Edge Gear's name to extend credit. When discovered, the banks immediately sent the cases to civil court. He's being sued by 3 creditors, totaling over $68,000. Jill added, because he was once an accountant, this behavior is considered intentional fraud and could be criminally prosecutable if not remedied. I felt no joy, no triumph, only calm solace that justice was unfolding without my hand. Meanwhile, in Colorado, the news about Michaela Hale haunted my silence. She gave birth to a baby boy at 34 weeks, but Child Protective Services intervened once police confirmed DNA evidence linking the child to Charles Hale. Proof incontrovertible. Charles was detained pending trial for abuse and concealing criminal acts, and Michaela lost custody for unsafe living environment and serious deceit. The child was placed in the care of maternal relatives. Local media ran her image on television. Drained face, hollow eyes. Perhaps for the first time, she understood that truth cannot be sustained by lies. I sent no messages. I made no comment. I merely stood by the window of my small Seattle apartment, gazing across Lake Union's shimmering surface. All those who once tried to control me, to wound me, are now being swallowed by their own choices. I need do nothing more, for justice no longer requires an audience. Days later, social media and the presses began spreading a different story. Not scandal, but rebirth. Kimberly Martinez, from betrayed CEO to founder of Rise Beyond Foundation. A photo of me planting the flag on Rainier went viral. Someone had captured it before I knew. Articles hailed me as a symbol of women's autonomy, not repaying cruelty with bitterness, but with progress. A Seattle paper ran a headline: "The woman who chose to climb instead of retaliate and won." I read it and smiled. Not because they praised me, but because I understood. They praised something that millions of silenced women are discovering in themselves: the strength to rise, not to respond. That night, I opened my laptop and typed more into Summit Within. Some think justice is the gavel's strike. To me, justice is looking back on the past and no longer trembling. It's seeing I still stand, though everything collapsed. I saved the draft, turned off lights, let Seattle's night wind seep through the curtains, bringing cold, but also a rare peace. I had walked my path, and for the first time, justice was not something I fought for. It was something I had become. On a crisp December morning, the sky over Seattle was clear and cold like crystal. I stepped onto a small stage at the downtown community hall, surrounded by a sea of cameras and soft, scattered applause. After nearly half a year of preparation, the Rise Beyond Foundation was officially launched, a community fund for post-divorce women, helping them rebuild, reclaim confidence, and learn to lead their own lives. Behind me, the foundation's logo appeared, a white mountain breaking through gray clouds. Beneath it, the words, "Climb again, live again." I took a deep breath before speaking. When they take everything from you, see it as the chance to rebuild, from your own hands. In the front row, Jill Conway and Sophie Grant sat side by side, smiling with pride. They were no longer just friends. They were now co-founders. Jill handled the legal structure. Sophie led emotional coaching and therapeutic climbing activities. Everything came together naturally, like breathing, because all three of us understood. Women don't need pity. They need tools to stand on their own. 2 months later, the foundation received sponsorships from 3 major outdoor brands: Patagonia, REI, and Black Diamond, all former partners of Summit Edge. They didn't just send money, they provided gear, training programs, and job placement support. The first cohort of Rise Beyond Women began launching cafes, craft workshops, small climbing stores, or returned to college. Each time I saw their photos online with the hashtag #Rise Beyond, I felt like I was looking at a version of myself from years ago. Resilient, trembling, but moving forward. One late evening, as we sat in our small Lake Union office, Jill said, "Kimberly, do you realize? We've turned our wounds into a foundation others can stand on." I looked out at the lake reflecting city lights and smiled. Maybe this is the real summit I needed to climb. A few months later, I was invited to speak at the Women in Motion Summit, an event gathering women making an impact in sports and business. After my presentation, as I stepped off stage, a man approached, tall brown hair, warm eyes, and an easy smile. He introduced himself. "I'm Noah Pierce, climbing coach from Oregon. I've read Summit Within 3 times, and I just want to say, You didn't need saving, but you made people want to be better. I paused for a moment, then laughed. A soft, unguarded laugh, unburdened and real. We sat down in the lounge area, talking about Rainier, about how climbing teaches people to face fear, and the quiet power of silence. Noah didn't try to prove he understood me. He simply listened, truly listened. For the first time in years, I felt my heart lower its defenses. When he asked, "Do you believe that, after everything falls apart, we can love again?" I answered, my voice steady and warm. "I don't know. But I know real love doesn't save someone from the cliff. It climbs with them, step by step, no matter how strong the wind." He smiled, his eyes reflecting sunlight I thought I had lost. And as we walked out of the venue together, Seattle's rain had just stopped, the last light of day breaking through the wet sky. I looked up and smiled, the smile of someone who had survived, who had healed, and who was ready to believe in something good again. 1 year later, spring dawned radiant and calm in Seattle. I stood on the outdoor stage of the Martinez Summit Center, a climbing and empowerment hub for women, born from the Rise Beyond Foundation's growth. Behind me stretched the snow-capped Cascade Range. Before me stood hundreds of women, those who had once fallen, once broken, now standing tall and strong. I looked at them, a slow smile spreading across my face. My voice rang steady and warm through the mic. If they made you fall, use that fall as a foothold to climb higher. Every wound is an anchor, not to bind you, but to keep you from falling again. The crowd fell into a deep hush, then erupted into thunderous applause. I looked skyward into the endless blue. That afternoon, I climbed a small peak near the center, carrying only 3 things: the Rise Beyond flag, a photo of me with the team, and a second edition copy of Summit Within. At the summit, light snow drifted like chalk dust. I planted the flag into the soft ice, squinting into the sunlight filtered through mist. Wind tousled my hair. I closed my eyes, smiled, and whispered, "At last, I no longer climb to prove anything. I climb because I love this sky." The screen faded to black, with a simple line in white. "Freedom isn't revenge, it's recovery." Then the light disappeared completely, leaving only the sound of wind and the breathing of a woman who had climbed not just mountains, but through the peaks and valleys within her own heart. If this story touched you, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who may need to hear it today. Because who knows, they might be in the middle of their own climb and just need one reminder not to give up.